Yeah, so we're looking at Romans, and we stopped in verse 7 of chapter 8. And we kind of paused. We were looking at dioti, which is a somewhat equivalent in meaning to oti, but obviously there's some additional marking going on there because it's from dia. Apparently, it's from dia tutto oti. So on account of this reason, that. So on account of this. So it's translated for or because, but really I think there's a little bit more going on because it's kind of ramped up. And so I like to try to tease out the difference in translation, because if we just translate it because or for, it sounds like it's a gar or a ot. There's also another conjunction that means like for or because. It's epi, which means like since. Not the preposition epi, but it's spelled with epsilon iota at the end. Since. So, is he, if there is a remnant of like a demonstrative pronoun, like on account of this, that, then it may be that there's a particular kind of a specificity that's happening right here. So perhaps because in fact, or something like that, somehow to ramp it up that he's reaching some kind of statement, final statement or whatever. So because in fact to phronema tes sarkos ekthra is theon to gar nomo tu theu uk upotasete udegar dunete. So for in fact, because in fact the mindset of the flesh, and this is a verbless clause, so we have to supply it. Usually if it's a verbless, we try to supply emi or the copula, some form of the copula, or we supply a verb from the context. But we've been seeing like verse 6 is verbless. So at this point, we're supplying some form of emi, some form of emi. So we just say, the mindset of the flesh is ekthra, enmity, ekthra is theon, towards God. And the is directional and may even signify some kind of like destination, so it's not a good thing at all. Enmity that's directed at God, the mindset of the flesh. Now, phronema is related to the verb we've been seeing, phroneo, in verse 5. Verse 5 says, for those being according to the flesh have their mind set on the things of the flesh. So have their mind set on, to be intent upon. Phronema, when you have, so Greek has adjectives and nouns and verbs that they're cognates, they're built off from each other. And when you see a noun formed with ma, the ma is marking usually result or consequence. So it's like having a bad mindset and the result of that, thinking a certain way, being intent on something. Well, what's the end result of that? Having a mindset. I think mindset is a good translation. It's like a destination or a result point. It's like the final result of having your mind intent on something. Hi, welcome. So the end result mindset of the flesh is death, something like that. But the phronema of the spirit is life and peace. So that's verse 6. So he's almost repeating himself, but now he's elaborating just a little bit more. He says that the mindset of the flesh is enmity towards God. For to the law of God, it is not able to submit. So this verb upotasso or upotasome takes the dative case as its direct object. So the to nomo is the direct object of upotasate. And so that's why it's in the dative case. Obviously, it's fronted in front of the verb. So that kind of throws you off, right? By this point in Greek, you realize there's this flexible word order. And this is called scrambling. So certain language allow for scrambling of elements. And this scrambling of word order is for the sake of prominence or focus and these kinds of things, or framework, providing like a framework. So to the law of God, it is not able to submit. We're in verse 7. For it is not able to. For it is not able to. So you have a lot of supporting statements. DOT, because, in fact, gar, for, And we noticed last time that the discourse is going to shift pretty radically because we've been seeing lots of gars, lots of supporting statements. But in verse 8, we're going to get da, like he's gonna start to make new points, and so we'll have to pay attention. Like there seems like kind of a shift here, and it's almost like we've reached the bottom of the problem, almost like the root of the problem. Like, why is it so bad to be having a mindset of the flesh? Because it's enmity towards God. It's not able to submit to the law of God. It's not able to. It doesn't submit. It's not even able to. So that's what's achieved by the uda gar. The uda is a negative u with de, and that de is marking a new development. So we translate that, nor is it able to. So for the mindset of the flesh is not submitting to the law of God, nor for neither is it able to. So the gar is marking strengthening, and the de is making a further statement about that. So not only does it not submit, it's not even able to submit. And that's significant. So the mindset of the flesh. So there's something about the flesh when it gets into like a final state of being, when we somehow are so oriented by our creatureliness, our flesh as representing the fact that we're created. When we're in that mindset, we're just not even able to submit to the law of God. Sin is so infiltrated our flesh. Maybe our appetites, our orientation, even what we imagine. It's almost like there's some kind of ceiling on our ability to live differently. So verse 8 then. Someone want to translate verse 8? Or read it and then translate?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Okay.
But those being in flesh, please
go.
God. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go to the verb first. Yeah.
Are not able to please God.
Yes, good. Yeah. So the ones. So here the de. I like to translate as moreover sometimes, and I think this really works right now. And sometimes it's and or but. There's different ways to translate the de, but it's marking new development or distinctive development. And in this case, I think moreover works pretty well. Moreover, the ones in the flesh being, that's a big substantive. So you've got a participle ontes with an article functioning by itself makes a noun, which is called a substantive, and it's sandwiching the in flesh. So the ones being in the flesh, and then you go to the verb u dunate, are not able, and then with the verb dunate or duname, you're looking for a complementary infinitive. Certain verbs take an infinitive to complete their meaning. I want to do something, I'm able to do something, I hope to do something. So we have this in English as well. So Greek has this. And so you learn certain verbs will tend to take the infinitive, and then you start looking for that infinitive. What makes this one just a little bit tricky is that you have the infinitive placed in front of the verb, and then the object of that infinitive is theo. To please, takes the dative case. So to please God. So ariste is an aorist active infinitive that takes the dative case, to please God. Um, yeah, most often with dative of persons, it says in the lexicon. So yeah, the word order is, there's a lot of fronting that's going on, to kind of say what's in focus, then also to stress kind of new ideas. So typically objects of the verb follow the verb. But when you start putting them in front of the verb, you're putting some kind of stress on them. And here, the stress is on the goal of pleasing God, and now the inability to please God. That word group, by the way, is really really good to study. Like, to please God. Like, that's a fun word study. You know, what pleases God? Who's able to please God? What pleases God? How do we please God? So this idea of being pleasing to God is really worth studying. Yeah. All right. So they are not able. So present tense. These are kind of present tense realities. Not able to submit to God. Not submitting to God. Not able to. Not able to please God. And that's a pretty serious problem, to not be able to be pleasing God. So here, then in verse 9, we have we get some good news. Paul turns and starts speaking a little bit more positively. And does someone want to read that aloud and then translate?
I'll go.
We have someone. We'll let Basi do it since Basi's online. Go ahead, Basi, nice and loud.
Okay. Do you want the whole verse or just the first sentence?
Well, we'll let you do the first verse, and we'll let Stephanie do the second part. We'll let you do 9a. Thank you. What's highlighted?
Yeah. Who makes the orchestra and Saki, Allah and Numati, Hyper Numatheo Oikeo, and Human.
All right. And then how do we translate that?
I will take the humes in emphatic. I don't know, but you yourself, you are not in the flesh. Expecting a yes answer. Ook?
Oh, no, it's not a question.
Yeah,
If it's a question, it would be expecting a yes, but it's not a question. It's just a simple declaration.
You yourself are not in the flesh, but in the spirit.
But in the spirit.
In spirit, thank you. If indeed a pair, or since the spirit of God, oikeo, dwells in you, within you, among you, things like that. So
yeah, good. Yeah, so the umis here is it's not necessary, but it helps to mark contrast. So there's emphasis in terms of contrast. A new points being made, new distinctive point, de. You yourselves are not in the flesh, but in the spirit. So this is called a counterpoint point construction. Uk Allah. So not this, but this. If indeed the Spirit of God is dwelling in you. Yeah. Now the iper, you translated it since, which is okay, but there's other words that translate since. And so I like to keep iper as a condition, as a
E-
condition. Now, with conditionals, there is a sense logic. If then indicates a causation logic,
Flip.
cause to effect, but it's flipped here.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's emphasis. So usually the if part of a condition, what's called the protasis, occurs first. But when it occurs last, there's some stress on it because it's breaking the normal default positioning. In addition to that last positioning, you also have the pair added to it, the hyper. Now, pair is an interesting word because it actually has its separate entry in our lexicon, BDAG, but it never occurs alone. It's always added to some conjunction. And BDAG says it's a particle with intensive or extensive force. And it's come with the words, and the words, so the words compounded with it. So diopere, aeonpair, e-pair, as we have here, epi-de-pair, epi-pair, you get the idea. Katha-pair. So pair is, it's hard to translate, but it's adding a little bit of oomph to it. And so here you have a little bit of stress on this. And I think the reason why you have stress on this is because this is the underlying reality of what really matters. Is the Spirit of God dwelling in you or not? If in fact the Spirit of God dwells in you. All right, so Stephanie, do you want to read the second part of verse 9 then?
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure, yeah.
I'm just wondering why the definite article is not being used here, especially with the Spirit of God. Is that because it comes before the verb, or is it because the influence of Theou, or what is it?
You know, the rules of article use would suggest that when something is introduced for the first time, it doesn't have the article, but thereafter it should have the article unless it's stressed. And I would suggest that there's stress on the Spirit of God. And part of that stress is seen also in its fronted position. Yeah. And so one principle that I began seeing with prominence structures is that you often have more than one way that stress is being marked. So we saw that with e-pair. So not only is the E following the main clause, it has a pair added to it. It doesn't always have to have a pair, but that helps mark that as stressed. And so not only is pneuma theou the, well, I guess it's the subject. So it's not the object, but as subject, Greek has the normal word order of verb, subject, object. That's its default word order. So verb comes first, then subject, then object. So when you start seeing a variation of that, we're looking for different prominence or thematic focus. So here, the fact that the subject is placed before the verb is placing some stress on it. And so for me, it's not surprising that also it's lacking the article, which would help stress it as well. So these rules of article use are, Jenny Reed Heimerdinger explained to those of us at the Society of Biblical Literature, like a pre-meeting. And then I've had some personal correspondence with her. And then I was able to describe these principles in my Koine Greek grammar textbook. So I think it's a really interesting area of research, and yeah, the article usage is interesting, confusing, at times interesting. So I'm trying to always be aware of what might motivate the presence or lack of article. Yeah, so I think here there's some stress. The Spirit of God. Yeah. All right. So Stephanie, you want to read the second part? Yeah, or some spirit. Oh, wait, no, someone. That's right, someone. That's the subject. Good.
Does not have the spirit of Christ.
Yes. Yes. This one is not his or belong to him. But you basically got it. Good job. Yeah, so Stephanie's a second semester Greek student. She got it. So Des, post positive. But if someone does not have the spirit of Christ, this one is not his. Yes. Yes. Right. So Lifnay, she's one of our new doctoral students. She says this is a left dislocation clause. And that's exactly right. So the left dislocation has something introduced to the far left, and then it has a pronominal trace that picks it back up in the main clause, which it sounds a little bit weird because you don't need the this. And so in my Koine Greek grammar, I really was intrigued by this left dislocation. And you have frameworks, which are like, this would be a framework, I think, although it might be a topic, but I think it's a framework. And then you have topics. So I try to parse this out, and I'm asking, why does this occur? So I'm drawing on general linguistic studies, and my basic conclusion is that they mark discontinuity. So there's a to the immediate argument. So the immediately preceding idea, by using a left dislocation right here, this construction marks discontinuity, which means like a contrast. And sure enough, you see the contrast, right? You have the first part of verse 9, if the Spirit of God dwells in you, that's contrasted with if someone doesn't have the Spirit of Christ. This one is not his. So this is what's achieved by a left dislocation. So you can read, I have a pretty extensive discussion of this in my Koine Greek grammar in I think it's chapter 21. Yeah, good. Left dislocation topic.
Do you think there is any significance in its change into the third person singular? I mean, he's talking about you and you and you, and then he goes off and...
Yeah, I think the tis, right? It's an indefinite pronoun. Yeah. So I that's a great question. I always think it's important to pay attention to the pronouns being used, and because they start telling a story. So at this point, I think the fact that he uses a third singular and an indefinite pronoun creates an epistemic distance to the idea. In other words, he's not painting it super vividly. Should this be the case, if someone, I'm not talking about you, because you, the Spirit of God dwells in you, but if someone, if you happen to know someone, this one is not his. So I think that's part of the pragmatic effect of changing to third singular with an indefinite pronoun. But he is using the utos, this one, which is near. So the other thing I noticed about the left dislocated topics, they have an immediate discontinuity with the previous idea, but they also have broader continuity to the argument. And I think the fact that he uses the utos is this indicates I'm concerned about this, whether you have the Spirit or not. So this is a near idea, but it's not my point for you. I'm not doubting whether you do, but the idea of someone having the Spirit of God or not, this is important. Okay. How about verse 10? Someone want to read verse 10 and then translate? Okay, thanks, Jeff.
Ide Christos and Imin Omen Soma Ekron Dia amartian, to de, nefma, zoe, dia, dikeosne.
Good reading. Yeah, nice.
And so we get another of these. He's making another conditional statement with
Yep.
the e de.
Yep.
There's an assumed, it looks like there's an assumed be verb.
That's right.
So,
Assumed verb
so
implied.
moreover, but
Yep.
if Christ is in you all,
Yep.
then we have men, which is like certainly or indeed, so he's strengthening the argument. Soma, so he's using a different word, but it's body instead of flesh then.
That's right. It's body.
Is there another implied verb of being here?
Yeah, there is.
And
Yeah.
so you've got, would be then is dead,
Yeah.
dia, hamartian. So
Great.
accusative, so because of or on account of sin.
Yeah.
But then it's got a so it's a new development. And
Yeah.
It looks like it's contrasting.
Yes.
So it would be but
New development contrasting
the spirit
is
is
Zoe.
is
Life. Yeah, good. Yeah.
Dia on account of or because of
Righteousness. Yeah. Awesome. Very good. So the men de forms a point counter or point a counterpoint point set. So men de works together. It's a very good classical idiom on the one hand and then on the other hand. And so here you have a contrasting content. So people will say, well, de marks contrast. No, it can be used in contrasting statements, but de marks a new development, and here it's coordinating with men. And men is anticipating what comes next. And so it can work with de. And so de is the destination in a sense. We don't want to stay, we don't want to stay with the reality of the body is death because of sin. I mean, that's true, but the spirit is life because of righteousness. Yeah, on account of righteousness. Yeah. So nice verbalist statements. And we should be talking about the type of conditional sentences. And I don't like the traditional way of classifying them, first, second, third, fourth class. It's not concrete enough. So I advocate in chapter 26 a different model, which is a classical model, comes out of Smythe's grammar. And these are present simple conditions. E with the present indicative, followed by the present indicative in the conclusion or the apodosis. So he's talking about present realities. And I think it's often helpful to think of the time frame and some of the semantics. This is kind of just a default present tense condition, present time frame condition. So nothing really too remarkable, although it is, I think, important for us just to think about. He's talking about realities that are now, that can be existing now. Yeah.
Is it significant that he switches to soma as opposed to using, I guess, sarf here? Because what he's saying then is not that this flesh that's been causing so much problems is dead, but it's the body. Like, is he trying to, like, is it significant
Yeah,
that
it is.
there
Yeah.
still seems to be a sense in which, even though the spirit is life,
Yeah.
there's still going to be that wrestling with something else.
It's great question. Yeah, so the issue is, the question is why does he switch to soma here? Yeah, and that's great. So Jeff is also a second semester Greek student, and him and Stephanie are nailing it. So Sark's it profiles, I think, construes our creatureness, and sin is somehow really entangled in that as we try to survive and our desires, and the consequence of that is that our soma dies. So soma profiles like our entire person, in a sense, like our body as a container that has members, and our body dies. So, so while we have this sarx existence, we don't have to live by that sarx existence, which is having enmity and hatred towards God. But we still have a body that we have to live in, but that's also going to die. And that presents a bit of a problem for us. And chapter 8 is going to get into our sufferings, our pathemata. For I don't consider sufferings worth compared to the future glory to be revealed in us. So this is really part of our struggle, perhaps even as fleshly creatures, the fact that we have these passions and desires and really sufferings of all kinds. So not only temptation, desires, and sufferings, but also just ailments. And I mean, I'm 55 now. It sucks getting old. It really does, you know. My mind, and like I'm still like a teenager or like a 20-year-old. Like I just think I can do stuff. I just jump and just climb up the ladder. But it's dangerous now. It's dangerous. So yeah, I think as we see the discourse moving forward, he's going to wrestle with this idea of our bodiliness and the consequences of that as death. But now we have a new force working on us that's going to counteract that, although we're still all going to die. Yeah, it's really good to pay attention to the switching between the terms. I think it's helpful.
Yeah, Dr. Long.
Yes, hi, Fen.
Yeah, can you explain more about the terms, kind of the Spirit of God and then the Spirit of Christ, and also the verse 10 in Christ? Did any kind of the different, or just Paul want to emphasize the same thing?
Oh, I think that's beautiful, Fen. Another great observation, because what does Christ reveal about us in terms of our soma? I mean, why is it so nice that now we're talking about Christ's Spirit? What do you think? In regard to our bodies dying. Because his body died and was resurrected. Right? So that same Spirit of Christ is in us. And so it helps us realize the same life of Christ. Christ died in his flesh, but also was, died in his body, but was raised into a new body. So I think it's significant that the Spirit is described as the Spirit of Christ.
Can I ask a question here?
Yeah.
In this verse 10, you've got two uses of dia hamatia and then dia dikausunen.
Yeah.
Must these be translated in exactly the same way? I mean, I can understand why the body is mortal or dying because of sin, but does it mean because of righteousness? The spirit is life? I mean, I don't quite get that. Or should it be due to righteousness or what?
At Asbury here, we're part of the holiness tradition, and we believe in sanctification. And this word righteousness is really important. And life comes by living righteously. And so I think sin and righteousness are opposed as sin categories, as sin versus the opposite of sin categories. And so I think Paul would say there's a life. The Spirit helps us to live, and we're living because actually we're living differently. We're living in a righteousness that is both imparted and imputed. I mean, imputed and imparted. So righteousness that is embodied. So he's been urging us that we live differently now. So chapter 6, if we're under grace, do we keep on sinning? He says, no way. So, and the thing is that righteousness is preparing for resurrection as well. I think it was one of our students here. He then studied with, was it Andrew Lincoln? He might have been Andrew Lincoln's last student, Matt Riley. I think it was his dissertation. He looked at righteousness in relation to resurrection in Romans. So in other words, he tracked that connection. So I think the fact that he's contrasting sin and righteousness when he's talking about a body as well is looking forward to the fact that now believers are called to have a righteous life, and that the Spirit helps us to live righteously, and that this is also looking forward to our resurrection. How we live matters now. Yeah. So I don't know if I'm, so there's obviously a parallelism, and I think that, Christ lives righteously and he brings life, but he also transfers that righteousness to us, but also through his Spirit imparts it to us so we can embody that. Yeah, that's how I would connect those ideas. So verse 11 then, someone want to translate or read and then translate verse 11? That's a long one.
You can separate the two parts.
Okay,
Can do
Noah's
it if
gonna
you like.
read 11.
Ada top.
If you like, take my turn. Yes.
Pardon me, Peter?
Do you want me to read verse 11 to do my turn?
Yeah, we'll let you do it. We'll let you read. Go ahead, read for all verse 11. Sorry, no.
Okay.
Go ahead, Peter.
Aide to pneuma tu egairentos ton Iesun ek necron oikai en humin. O eg aeres Christon ek necron zoapoesai kai doth neta somata humon dia tu enoikuntos autu pneumatos en humin.
Great. Yeah. So how would you translate that?
I'll say, but if the spirit of the one who raised up Jesus from among the dead lives in you or among you, the one who raised up Christ from the dead shall make alive also your mortal bodies, I suppose, through
Yes.
the one who dwells or lives by his spirit in you, or by his spirit who indwells within you, or
Yeah.
in or among you, I suppose.
Yeah, in or among you. So through the
Through
indwelling
his
spirit
spirit who
of
dwells
his,
among you, yes, through his spirit who dwells.
indwelling spirit of his dwelling among you, or through the spirit of his indwelling among you. Yeah, it's tricky. The one raising Jesus. Yeah. So here we have to disambiguate who's the his here at the end. Through the spirit of his, is that Christ's spirit? Which I think probably, I guess it's actually be God's spirit, because the spirit of the one who raised Jesus. Yeah, so it's interesting. So here we have Ide, so new development, going back to verse 11 to start. And so I'm looking at what kind of condition this is. So you get Ide with the present indicative, and then the main verb is zoopac, which is future. So this would be a mixed condition. It starts out as a present simple probably, but then moves into a future orientation, future tense. So future, probably more vivid condition, but it's a mixed present moving to future. And so he's connecting, I mean, theologically, it's kind of important that so the present indwelling of the Spirit is related to our future making alive of our mortal bodies. And that ked there, after making alive, zoopac, is marking thematic addition. So also will make alive also your mortal bodies. Yeah. So if the spirit of the one who raised Jesus from the dead dwells in you, the one raising Jesus from the dead, and this is what your questions were anticipating. mean, I wasn't reading verse 11 when I was saying all that I was saying. I really didn't read through the text. So this was where Paul's going. You can see he's connecting these ideas of Christ's resurrection with our future resurrection, particularly meeting us in our mortal bodies. Yeah, raising up our mortal bodies through the Spirit. Yeah, that this last prepositional phrase is a bit gnarly. Through the indwelling Spirit of His among you or in you. Yeah. So the Spirit is so important for Paul because it's a guarantor. It guarantees our future bodily resurrection. So not only does the Spirit produce righteousness in our living, like empower us to live differently, it's also connecting us to the future, the eschaton. Yeah. So Basi.
Yeah, Dr. Long, if you go back to verse 9, I was wondering the aspect of the two verbs there, the two negated verbs, ak and esten. You want to speak a little bit more about the aspect of those verbs, what is doing to defining the present state. He said, if you do not have currently, you are not. And then he's moving down in verse 11 that we just read. He established from a present reality and then connect to a future reality. Do you want to is that something that you want to do on this platform? Because I think it's beautiful that there's a theological conundrum there that he defines the possession of the Spirit currently equaling the definition of what a Christian is. So I don't know.
Yeah. No, I think that's worth noting. I mean, it raises questions about whether, once saved, always saved, or is by using the condition here, as he said, is there an implication that one might in the future not have the Spirit of God dwelling in them? And then that would put them obviously in jeopardy in terms of having their mortal bodies made alive or not. But certainly he is making, he's wanting to urge this as a present reality that has a future corresponding reality. And that's what the thematic addition of the ke adds. Also, if this is true now, this also will happen to your mortal bodies. He will also make alive. Yeah. All right. Well, a lot of fun. We have time for one more verse. We got 5 till 1. Yeah, so we got to do one more for Noah. So Noah's going to read verse 12 and maybe 13a. Yeah, up to Apothneskin.
Arun adokoi afilitai ismin u te sarki tu katasarka sein. Egar katasarka zete milite apothneskin. Doubling up the whatchamacallits here.
The Arun, yeah, it's double connectives.
I'm just going to say one therefore, but Mark, that's pretty,
yeah,
that's significant enough.
Yeah.
Therefore, brothers, we are not under obligation not in the flesh to live according to the flesh. For if you live according to the flesh, you are to die according to the flesh in the future.
Or you're about to die.
You're about to die.
Yeah.
Okay. Melita is new to me.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. You're about to die. Yeah, for if you live according to the flesh, you are about to die.
Melita is such a weird word.
Pardon me?
Genitive definite article 2 in verse 12.
Yeah, the living, we're obligated not in the flesh or with reference to the flesh to live Yeah, so it's going with Tain, Zane. So
then
two
it's
Zane.
infinitive.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because really, if infinitive structure has a accusative definite article,
Yeah. Except I'm wondering if afele te takes the genitive. Yeah. So I think it takes the genitive, afele te, obligators to live according to the flesh. So that's why you have the genitive with the infinitive. And sometimes you can have the genitive with the infinitive for purpose, but I don't think purpose works here.
it is not.
Yeah. So we are obligators, not in reference to the flesh, to live according to the flesh. So this is the the other conundrum that we're in, is that in Christ we still have a fleshly existence. Like we still are we still have sarx. And so sarx is not always negative for Paul, although he does, like in Galatians 2:20, he says, the life I live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God. I think it's the context in which we find ourselves, and in which so often there is struggle because of our creatureliness, and we tend to become self-referential, basing stuff on our flesh, and that's where our passions really are at play, and these get us astray. And so the Gnostics want to just like really deny the flesh and just become all mind, but that doesn't work either. So Colossians, Paul is talking about people who are trying to, by following certain rigid restrictions of the body, that to somehow get to some perfection. And so that's not the solution. So we just have to be sober and say we live in the flesh now, but we don't set our minds on the things of the flesh. We set our minds on the things of the spirit. But we can't deny that we're in the flesh still. Like we still are in the flesh. So what are we going to do about that? He says we're not obligators to live in the flesh according to the flesh. And that's good news. Are we going to take him at his word at that? We don't have that debt anymore to do that. We're not obliged to do that anymore. That's a huge statement. Some people's like, well, I can't help myself. I'm in the flesh. I can't help it. Paul, that's not an excuse. It's not an excuse for him. And then verse 13 is like really scary. If you live according to the flesh, you're about to die.
Yeah.
It almost raises the question, Basi, your question about present tense is, what if in the future we're not in the spirit? We're about to die, I guess.
Yeah.
It's a danger for us.
And in the second part of verse 13, Paul changes to soma thoughts.
Yeah.
Not flesh.
Yeah. So if by the Spirit you died to the deeds of the body, you will live.
Yeah.
Now it's interesting that two somatos is used. I might have expected sarx, and guess what? There's a textual variant there. The Western tradition, almost exclusively, it seems like DFG and Irenaeus Latin. The Latin tradition switched that to the sarkos, te sarkos, which I could understand why they would do that. The deeds of the body, you will live. Well, I think we need to stop there. We'll pick up maybe right at verse 14. And so very fun.